But it would have been great for us to follow Alex around. Where it doesn't always try to keep it rising level. It just smooths that flow because you'll get kind of those, turning, you'll get that angle horizon. So you kind of make it a little dynamic. It'll smooth it out, but it'll just kind of give you the right. Because the other modes always try to keep it horizon. The FPV is smoothed it out, but it'll, if you tilt the camera sideways, it'll go sideways. Right, but it'll smooth out the motion. Yeah. So, like, if you ever see the first person videos where that's what it will look. So if you're no, it'll just follow where
Jay, are we good? Okay, everybody ready? We're here today to announce the arrest of 32-year-old Martin Gibson for the murder of Jakeem Douglas at 7 Illinois Street on December 13th, 2022. Also charged in relation to this case is 31-year-old Devontae Lippens. He's charged with shooting one of the other victims on Illinois Street 2 years ago. On December 13th, 2022, at around 10:30 at night, Rochester police officers responded to 7 Illinois Street for multiple calls of gunshots and people shot. Officers arrived on the chaotic scene and found evidence of a shootout in the basement. Nearly 20 gunshots were fired by multiple weapons. While officers were attempting to secure the scene, 5 shooting victims arrived at local hospitals. 4 victims were transported by private vehicle to Rochester General Hospital. 1 was transported to URMC by ambulance. Jakeem Douglas, 24 years old, was one of the victims dropped off at RGH. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. The other men shot were all between the ages of 19 and 30 years old. Investigators learned the house on Illinois Street had been rented out for the evening to record a rap video and commemorate a murder victim from several years ago. There was around 20 to 30 people in attendance. A little before 10:30 p.m., a group entered the residence and made their way to the basement. They arrived with the intent of confronting a man they believed had previously stolen an illegal handgun from them. After finding their intended target in the basement, multiple gunshots were fired by multiple people, resulting in 5 men getting shot. We do not believe Mr. Douglas was the initial intended target of this shooting. Following the shooting on Illinois Street, retaliatory gunshots were fired at multiple locations throughout the city of Rochester, including on Waring Road and on Henry Street. Working in coordination with patrol investigations, we were able to rather quickly determine that all of these incidents were connected. Patrol investigators executed a search warrant on Henry Street. They recovered 3 handguns, an assault-style rifle, 2 shotguns, several bulletproof vests, several extended magazines for both rifles and pistols, a large quantity of Suboxone, fentanyl, amphetamine pills, and over 50 grams of cocaine. Fairly soon after the shooting, investigators were able to identify the people involved, but the investigation stalled out due to a lack of cooperation. For the last 2 years, homicide investigators remain relentless in pursuing leads, working with the patrol and narcotics investigators, as well as Assistant District Attorney Merrick Sadler. Over the last month, ADA Sadler began presenting evidence to a grand jury. This week, a 32-count indictment was handed out pertaining to the mass shooting at 7 Illinois Street, as well as to the illegal weapons and drugs recovered on the Henry Street search warrant. Martin Gibson, the suspect identified as the person who shot and killed Jakeem Douglas, he was also one of the people that was shot that evening. Early Tuesday morning this week, our SWAT team executed a narcotics search warrant at Gibson's house, 372 Glenwood Avenue. The search warrant execution was a result of a coordinated effort between homicide and narcotics unit, as well as our SWAT team. Gibson was taken into custody while sleeping in his bed. With him in bed, he had a loaded 9mm handgun and a .22 caliber rifle. Also recovered in his bedroom was about 10 grams of cocaine and paraphernalia used to package and sell drugs. As a result of the guns and drugs that we found in his house on Tuesday, he was charged with criminal possession of a weapon second, criminal possession of a weapon third, and 3 counts of criminal possession of a controlled substance, as well as criminal possession of drug paraphernalia. Gibson does have prior gun and drug possession convictions. He was arraigned on the weapons charges on Wednesday morning and held. This morning, we unsealed an indictment in Monroe County Court that charged him with the murder second for killing Mr. Douglas on 7 Illinois Street almost 2 years ago to the day. He remains in custody. So in connection with the murder indictment, this week, charges were also unsealed, charging 31-year-old Devontae Lippens with shooting another person on Illinois Street. He also was indicted on multiple weapons charges. In short, he's charged with shooting somebody on Illinois and possessing guns on Henry Street that were recovered in the search warrant back then. Lippens was arrested early Tuesday morning this week in the city by members of the United States Marshals Violent Felony Fugitive Task Force, the New York, New Jersey region. At the time of his arrest, he was on his way to the airport leaving for vacation, which clearly is not going to happen now. There's no additional murder charges anticipated in this case, but there may be additional arrests related to all the weapons that were recovered. There's way too many charges to read. It's a 32-count indictment, so Captain Bello is going to hand out to you all the charges and who's charged with what. He also has pictures of all the weapons that have been seized during the course of this investigation. So I'm sure the first question that somebody's going to ask is why it took 2 years to make an arrest. So I'll just answer that up front. You know, aside from the complexity of all the evidence that was recovered in the basement, obviously you got 20 gunshots from multiple weapons. There's a ton of evidence. We also did recover a handgun that evening outside. So aside from all that, the processing of the evidence, you know, the big reason was a lack of cooperation from people that were there or people that had knowledge of this crime. Over the last 2 years, we've been able to gain that cooperation. And, you know, I really have to commend the investigators for their persistence in this case, as well as ADA Sadler, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be standing up here today either. So that's in summary what happened. I know it's a lot of information. If you guys have a few questions, we'll take them.
With this, it took 2 years. How do you think that, what are the next steps, and how do you think that this arrest will help the family?
Listen, the family who has joined us here today, you know, they're never going to forget their loss, and nothing is going to make that loss go away. But at least now there's a sense of relief knowing that somebody's going to be held accountable, and they at least have answers to questions that they've had for the last 2 years. Thank God they haven't had to wait 30 or 40 years like some of our other families have. 2 years is absolutely too long of a time, but at least now they can move on with the next phase of the healing process. They'll never fully recover from it. They're always going to miss him, but at least now, we've provided them answers that they've desperately wanted over the last couple of years.
Can you say what you've done over the past 2 years to gain that cooperation that led to these arrests?
Yeah, I haven't done anything personally, but our investigators and ADA Sadler, it's just, I'm not going to get into details, but I can't tell you the persistence that they have had, the never quit attitude. This case could certainly have ended up in the back room with a lot of other cold cases that we have. But because of ADA Sadler and the investigators, Joel and Pete, who were on the case, they knew who was involved. This was not a whodunit. We knew who was involved. It's just getting people to cooperate. And there's different reasons why people end up cooperating with us. So we're not going to get into those, but you have to remain persistent. And thank God in this case, we had investigators and a district attorney who was committed to staying persistent and not giving up.
Captain, are you able to get into the relationship between the victims, suspects, the group that was there that night?
Sure. They were all associates. And I know somebody's going to ask, is this gang related? This is not gang related. The suspects and the victims in this case were all associates. This is not, a result of a gang war. It was results, somebody thought that somebody else stole an illegal gun. And again, it wasn't our victim who was the initial intended target of this, but that's why this whole thing started. So.
Frank, I'm looking at the pictures of the guns you recovered. You got to believe these guns were used in other crimes?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Berkeley. I'm not going to get into any specifics, but we test all guns, and the investigation is still ongoing. Unfortunately, guns change hands a lot of times, right? So just because a gun was used in something 2 years ago and somebody's caught with it today doesn't mean that they're the ones that possessed it way back when. So it's certainly helpful to know if it was involved in other incidents. But these specific weapons that we recovered, I'm not going to get into specifics. Nobody is being charged with anything other than what we talked about today pertaining to those guns.
I know that it's probably not part of the investigation to figure out where the guns come
Mhm.
from, but do you know where these guns, how do these guns end up in our community?
We're not going to talk specifically where. I don't know where these guns specifically came from. We trace all the guns that we recover. We trace. It just wasn't pertinent to this investigation, so I don't have that answer for you. But there's a ton of different ways guns get here. Some of them are stolen, some of them are illegally transported across state lines and brought here and sold illegally. Some of them are ghost guns that are made here.
Frank, the cooperation connected.
Mhm.
How important is that? For all those things.
Each case is different. Sometimes we don't need people to cooperate because we have enough other evidence, whether it be physical evidence, DNA evidence, video evidence. But 9 out of 10 times we need people to cooperate. Probably 90% of the murders that happen here in Rochester, we know who the suspects are. It's just a matter of getting enough to make an arrest. And cooperation is huge. We're fortunate. Most of the time we can get cooperation that we need. Citizens have been great, especially, the last couple of years and coming forward and sharing information with us. But, we always need cooperation from people. We can't make cases if people don't cooperate with us. All right. Thank you.